Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. Use the promo code HEROES to save 10% on all orders over $10. From July 4th through August 26th, if you use this promo code, you will automatically be entered into a drawing to win a set of all 4 Commander 2019 decks. Also, there is another way to enter where no purchase is necessary. See the description below for full details. Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and today we're going to go back and look at the big tournament results from the weekend. As always, we're going to look at a number of the deck lists, especially focusing on cards from Core Set 2020 and Modern Horizons that performed well last weekend, but we have a lot of tournaments to look at. There was a Magic Fest in Birmingham that had a Modern Grand Prix. Also, Star City Games, they had an Open, which was a team event, which consisted of Standard, Legacy, and Modern, and they also had a Classic for Standard, Legacy, and Modern, so there's a lot to dig into. Let's just get started. We'll begin as we always do with Standard, first looking at the Star City Games Open. Like I said, this was a team event, so teams are playing a Standard deck, a Modern deck, and a Legacy deck, which means maybe a good Modern or Legacy deck could prop up a weaker Standard deck or vice versa. So just keep that in mind today as we look at Open results, but here are the decks the top 8 teams were playing. First place, as well as third place, as well as 6th place, Bant Scapeshift. Second place, as well as 5th place, Bant Ramp. 4th place, as well as 8th place, Mono Red Aggro. Then 7th place was Golos Nexus. Okay, so a little variety, but as you can see, Bant is still a very, very popular color combination. Bant Scapeshift decks continue to do really well. Bant Ramp continues to do very well too. Let's look at some of these deck lists though. Here's the first place team's Bant Scapeshift deck, and this is a very popular deck, very successful deck, hasn't changed a whole lot from week to week. Ever since it really took off about 3 weeks ago at the GP, this deck has been dominant, so here it is again coming in first place in this particular event. Let's look at the Core Set 2020 cards that contribute to this deck. Bunch of them. Blooming Sands, Field of the Dead, of course, one of the key cards here. Temple of Mystery, Thornwood Falls, Tranquil Cove. Sideboard has Agent of Treachery and Veil of Summer. That's a card you're going to see a lot today. Now, some other successful Bant Scapeshift decks will throw in Golos Tireless Pilgrim and also Temple of Malady so they can activate it. Other sideboard options include Shifting Ceratops, Devout Decree, and Ether Gust. Here's the second place team's Bant Ramp deck. Yes, Bant colors, but a very different deck. You're going to see a lot of mana dorks here. You're trying to ramp into some big plays. Voracious Hydra is a great card, which we'll be looking at in just a second. 3 of those in the main here. 4 Nissa, Who Shakes the World. If you can get Nissa out on like turn 4 even, it's a very powerful play. Teferi Time Raveler, 4 of those here. Let's take a look at the cards from Core Set 2020 that are contributing. Leafkin Druid, like I mentioned, Voracious Hydra, Risen Reef, and Temple of Mystery. Devout Decree and Ether Gust are in the sideboard. Now, other variations of the deck have included other cards in the sideboard. That includes Vivian Arcbow Ranger, Shifting Ceratops, more copies of Voracious Hydra, and Veil of Summer again. Here's the 7th place team's Golos Nexus deck. So one thing I got to point out right off the bat here, Star City Games had a number of misinputs this week when it comes to deck lists, so there are some incomplete deck lists or somewhat too many cards. Now, this particular one is missing 4 cards in the main, so just wanted to point that out. I don't think it's Scapeshift here because this type of deck with all the one-ofs with the lands, I think they're just trying to use Field of the Dead naturally. This could be a Boreal Grazer that's missing, could very well be Wilderness Reclamation because this is a Nexus deck. Notice it does have 4 copies of Nexus of Fate. Basically, it's a cross between a Nexus of Fate deck and a Field of the Dead deck. A lot of cards from Core Set 2020 here. Agent of Treachery, Elvish Reclaimer, Yurok the Desecrated, of course Golos Tireless Pilgrim, Drawn from Dreams, Blooming Sands, Field of the Dead, Temple of Mystery, and Thornwood Falls. Out of the sideboard is another copy of Yurok the Desecrated, Legion's End is here, and Veil of Summer again. The 8th place team went with good old Mono Red Aggro, and there's not a lot of changes here. This one's running 3 Experimental Frenzies, also 1 in the sideboard. You got your cheap spells like Lightning Strike and Shock, 4 Light Up the Stages, 3 Skewer the Critics. The creature suite is pretty consistent with what this deck has been doing for months now. Fanatical Firebrand, Get to Lava Runner, Goblin Chainwhirler, Runaway Steamkin. Now there are some cards from Core Set 2020 here though. In the main, Chandra Acolyte of Flame and Ember Hauler. The sideboard has another copy of Chandra Acolyte of Flame and also has Fry. Esper Hero, here's what the 12th place team was running as we go past the top 8 and look at some other decks. Yeah, Esper Hero can still put up good results. Again, not too different if you compare this deck list to last season's. This one is running 4 Hero Precinct 1, 4 big Teferi, 4 little Teferi. A lot of control elements here. Only card in the main from Core Set 2020 is Noxious Grasp. Sideboard does have Devout Decree. Here's the 13th place team's Orzhov Vampire build. Now, this has one too many cards in the sideboard. I think it's just Duress. I think there's probably 3 Duresses instead of 4. That's relatively typical when it comes to this deck. Now, the deck itself is a Vampire Tribal deck. A lot of these cards come from the Ixalan block, but a few Core Set 2020 cards really push this deck. Those cards are Sorin Imperious Bloodlord, Knight of the Ebon Legion, and Legion's End, which you'll find in the main. Cards like Legion's End and a number of other cards we're looking at here, they are good against the zombie tokens. That's why you're seeing them played more and more right now. Sideboard has Devout Decree, 2 more copies of Legion's End, and Noxious Grasp. Disfigure is also played in some sideboards of other successful copies of this deck. 17th place team was playing Boros Feather. Not a lot of these showing up anymore, but they can still put up a good result. They're not bad decks. God's Willing went a long way to making this a better deck for sure. Other than that, though, not a lot of changes here. 1 copy of Ajani, Adversary of Tyrants in the main. Of course, you got 4 copies of Feather, 4 copies of 10th District Legionnaire. You also have Defiant Strike, Reckless Rage. Let's see what else is here from Core Set 2020. Aside from the God's Willings, also Temple of Triumph. Fry is in the sideboard. Jeskai Feather, this is what the 19th place went with. Not too different, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. Of course, the core cards are the same. What do we get from Core Set 2020, though? God's Willing is here again, Temple of Epiphany, and also Temple of Triumph. Out of the sideboard, Devout Decree and Fry. Jund Dinosaurs, this is what the 22nd place team was running. Now, this deck's falling off a little bit. You're not seeing as many Jund Dinosaur decks putting up big results like we saw a few weeks ago, but they can still do okay, as you can see here. This hasn't really changed much. Really, from week 1, I feel like this deck list has been pretty static for the most part. Let's see the cards from Core Set 2020 that contributed. Again, you do have a lot of cards here from the Ixalan block, much like the Vampires deck, but some Core Set 2020 cards really push this. Those are Rotting Regisaur, Marauding Raptor, and Shifting Ceratops. The sideboard has a bunch of cards too. Noxious Grasp, Flame Sweep, Fry, and Veil of Summer. 24th place team running Izzet Phoenix, another deck that kind of fell off over the last few months now, but can still put up a good result. 4 Arclight Phoenix, 4 Crackling Drakes, and 4 Goblin Electromancers in this particular build. A lot of cheap spells. Couple Finale of Promise. Temple of Epiphany, the only main deck card here from Core Set 2020. The sideboard does have Ether Gust, Flame Sweep, and Fry, though. Okay, let's move on to the Star City Games Standard Classic. So this is just a standard event, but it is a little bit smaller. First place, second place, third place, 8th place, Orzhov Vampires. 4th place, Jeskai Super Friends. 5th place, Mono Red Aggro. 6th place and 7th place, Bantscape Shift. Let's look at some deck lists that we haven't looked at already. So let's skip down to the 4th place, Jeskai Super Friends deck. Now this deck's not running a ton of Core Set 2020 cards by any means, but it is having a good season. Take a look at all those Planeswalkers. Ashiok, Chandra Awakened Inferno, we're going to look at in just a second. You get Karn Sign of Urza, Narset, Saheeli, Sarkhan, Big Teferi, Little Teferi, Ugin the Ineffable. That's a lot of Planeswalkers. Let's see what Core Set does bring. In the main, just the one card I mentioned there, Chandra Awakened Inferno. Fry's in the sideboard. 4-color Legends. Okay, this came in 11th place. And here we go again. This one is missing 3 cards from the side. Could be Hero Precinct 1, maybe Cry of the Carnarium, or a combination of those two that's possible in this build, but can't say for sure, unfortunately. Other than that, though, it's a pretty unique deck. I like this build. You don't see it all the time, but it can put up a good result, as you can see here. This deck does run 4 Mox Ambers if you're looking for something to do with those cards. But as you can see, there's a lot of legendary creatures here. Some good Planeswalkers, too, to back them up. Of course, that 2020 kind of makes this deck possible with Kethis the Hidden Hand. You also get Temple of Malady, Temple of Mystery, and Temple of Silence. Cerulean Drake in the sideboard here. Dimir Control came in 13th place. You don't see too many of these right now. Esper Control or Esper Hero are a little more popular, but this deck can be good too. God Eternal Kefnet, 3 of those in the main. You get a couple Liliana Dreadhorde Generals there in the main as well. Also 4 copies of Narset. Let's see what comes from Core Set 2020. Legion's End and Noxious Grasp. Out of the sideboard, 2 more copies of Noxious Grasp. 14th place, Bant Reclamation or Bant Nexus, whichever you'd like to call it. This is the more classic version of this Nexus deck. 4 copies of Nexus of Fate, Wilderness Reclamation, and Root Snare, some of the core cards there. 3 Search for Azcanta, 3 Tamiyo, Collector of Tales. Core set 2020 does contribute with Drawn from Dreams and Temple of Mystery. Sideboard brings us Cerulean Drake, Shifting Ceratops, Ether Gust, and Veil of Summer. Okay, let's leave Standard behind, talk some Modern, first off with the results from Grand Prix Birmingham. Now, Hogak, you can see here, had a pretty good week. We're going to go through the top 8 in just a second. However, I think the writing is on the wall. This could be our farewell episode to Hogak. I think on Monday, Wizards will ban that card in Modern. I guess we'll see. If that does happen, I do think that's really going to change up the Modern format. Let's look at this top 8, though. First place, Mardu Shadow. Second place, as well as fourth place, as well as seventh place, Hogak. Third place, there's a Thopter Sword. Fifth place, Hardened Scales. Sixth place, Burn. Eighth place, Azorius Control. Okay, let's look at some of these deck lists. Channel Fireball does these really cool graphics, so that's what you're seeing here for the deck list. Here's your first place Mardu Shadow deck. This is a very solid deck, could be even better if Hogak does go away next week. We'll have to kind of see, but there are a lot of cards here that push this particular version of the deck from Modern Horizons. Those cards are Ranger Captain of Eos, Unearth, which was a reprint, but because it got reprinted in that set, it became Modern Legal, and Silent Clearing. In the sideboard, Plague Engineer and Shenanigans. Okay, here's the second place Hogak deck. I won't spend a ton of time on Hogak. I think you're pretty used to seeing it by now. You got 4 Vegevines in here, Faithless Looting, Bloodghast. Let's take a look at those Modern Horizons cards that made this possible. Carrion Feeder, of course, a reprint, becoming legal in Modern with this printing. Hogak Arisen Necropolis is the second card in the main here. Force of Vigor in the sideboard. Now, other successful copies this week have been using Nurturing Peatland in the main, and also Plague Engineer in the sideboard. Here's your third place. There is a Thopter Sword deck. So there are some different variations on this deck. Sometimes people would consider this the 4-color variant because it does run Teferi Time Raveler. Other times they'll call it Grixis and it still has Teferi in it. Sometimes you'll see Teferi's gone and then it will be a Grixis deck. Sometimes it's 4-color, but they're running green instead of white. So there are different varieties of this. We won't go into all of them today. This is the one that performed the best, so this is what we'll look at. Now, this is another one of those decks to watch if we lose Hogak. This has been very successful even in the Hogak world, so this could get even better. It does use the Thopter Sword combo, you see that here, but Modern Horizons really made this deck possible. Urza Lord High Artificer, of course, being a key component, along with Goblin Engineer and Arkham's Astrolabe. Now, some sideboards and other successful variations of this deck use these cards. Plague Engineer, some that do use green, Weather the Storm. Mystic Forge from Core Set 2020 can also be good here sometimes. Fifth place was Hardened Scales, as you can see here, and it's not a lot of changes to this deck. It's been around for a while, still very, very good. The only card that's newer here is Nurturing Peatland from Modern Horizons. Sixth place was Burn, and this is a pretty typical Burn deck nowadays, especially with some of the cards from the Modern Horizons set. Now, as you can see, not a lot of changes generally. We saw a deck very similar to this, if not exactly like this last week. But let's take a look at those Modern Horizons cards. Fiery Islet and Sunbaked Canyon. These are perfect for this deck because you don't want to run into too many lands. If that's the case, you can exchange these for cards. Huge for a Burn deck. Here's your 8th place Azorius Control deck. Again, nothing too revolutionary here. We're pretty used to seeing this deck. I am interested, though, in how the Planeswalker suite has evolved. Right now, this particular copy running 2 Jace the Mind Sculptors, 3 copies of Narset, 1 Big Teferi, 2 Little Teferi, all in the main. Here's what Modern Horizons brings, though. Force of Negation and Prismatic Vista. The sideboard also has another copy of Force of Negation. Now, some other variations of this deck that performed well this weekend were running these in the main. Winds of Abandon and another card that was reprinted but made Modern legal, Fact or Fiction. Some sideboards also have been using Generous Gift. Okay, let's return to that team event now at the Star City Games Open. Here are what your top 8 teams were playing for Modern. First place, Mono Red Phoenix. Second place, Humans. Third place, Azorius Control. Fourth place, Charge Tron. Fifth place, Hogak. Sixth place, Infect. Seventh place, 4-color Urza. Eighth place, Grixis Urza. Again, we're going to look at some deck lists that we haven't already looked at. Here is that first place team's Mono Red Phoenix build, and you know, Mono Red Phoenix has been performing very well. In fact, the Mono Red and the Gruul variety, which are very similar actually, they have been outperforming the Izzet variety recently, so that's something to keep an eye on. Now, these tend to be a little more aggressive on the ground with some aggressive creatures, as you can see here. Like the Izzet variety, though, they do run Arclight Phoenix and a whole lot of cheap spells. Modern Horizons did bring us Lava Dart as a reprint, Fiery Islet, and Sunbaked Canyon. This deck wasn't doing it, but many of the Mono Red Phoenix decks do run Magmatic Sinkhole in the sideboard. Second place team was running Humans. Yeah, this deck has been pretty consistent too. We saw a very similar build last week. 4 Ether Vials, a lot of powerful humans. Modern Horizons contributes with Waterlogged Grove. In the sideboard, Plague Engineer and Collector Oof. Alright, I know what you're saying. There's not enough Tron variants right now in Modern. Could we get another one? Yeah, we sure can. The 5th place team was running Charged Tron. This one brought to you by Karn the Great Creator, as well as Mystic Forge from Core Set 2020. Those are some of the key cards here, but this is doing something a little different. You have Core Tapper, Astral Cornucopia, Everflowing Chalice. Of course, you do have your Urza lands, which you would expect. So what is here from the newer sets? Just the Mystic Forge, but 4 copies in the main. 6th place team was running Infect, and I do think this is another deck that could get better if Hogak does go away, just because Scale Up has been such a great addition for Modern Horizons. Here's your aforementioned Scale Up, and also for Modern Horizons, Waterlogged Grove. Out of the sideboard, Force of Vigor and Veil of Summer from Core Set 2020. We'll leave the top 8 and look at what the 13th place team was running. It's Eldrazi Tron. This really hasn't changed much, so I won't spend a ton of time on it. As you can see, there are a lot of Eldrazi creatures. 3 Walking Ballista, you have your Urza lands, Karn the Great Creator, 4 of those, 1 Ugin the Ineffable. Let's go ahead and see what is coming to us from the newer sets. Just 1 copy out of the sideboard, but Mystic Forge again from Core Set 2020. 17th place team was running Dredge. Now, yes, there are 3 copies of Hogak here, but this is the classic Dredge deck. 4 Life from the Loam, 4 Creeping Chill, 4 Cathartic Reunion, 3 Prized Amalgams. It's funny because originally this wasn't running Hogak, and then it started running like 1 copy. Now it's like up to 3 copies. But this is a deck that won't be hurt by Hogak going away if that does happen, because this was a solid deck to begin with. 2 cards here for Modern Horizons in the main. Hogak Arisen Necropolis and another one of the reprints that became Modern Legal, Forgotten Cave. Shenanigans, Force of Vigor out of the sideboard. The 18th place team went with Tried and True Mono Green Tron. Not a lot to say about it. You know this deck if you play Modern. Hasn't really changed all that much. Veil of Summer, though, does show up in the sideboard from Core Set 2020. And sometimes you'll see Weather the Storm in sideboards. Not in this particular one, but some of the other successful variants have been running this. 20th place team was running Jund, and a couple things to point out here. First off, there's too many cards in the sideboard. Last time I checked, you couldn't run 7 Fulminator Mages. I think that was supposed to be 3. Aside from that, what's going on with this deck? Well, it didn't put up an incredible result in 20th place here, but in the next tournament, it actually did a lot better. You'll see that in a few moments. This is a powerful deck. It's been really good. Wrenn and 6 has been a huge card for it ever since Modern Horizons came out. So when I think about a powerful deck, if I can't play Hogak anymore, this definitely jumps to mind. Other than Wrenn and 6, which we'll look at in just a second, your core cards have been pretty similar for a long time. Dark Confidant, Bloodbraid Elf, Scavenging Ooze, Tarmogoyf is here, Tireless Tracker, 1 copy here in the main, Lightning Bolt, Fatal Push, so on and so forth. What do we get from Modern Horizons? Wrenn and 6, like I mentioned, Baron Moor and Tranquil Thicket, 2 reprints in Modern Horizons that became Modern Legal, and Nurturing Peatland. In the sides, you're going to find Plague Engineer and Collector Oof. Now, other variations of this deck are running these cards in the main. Chandra Acolyte of Flame from Core Set 2020, and Seasoned Pyromancer from Modern Horizons. 24th place team went with Were Prison, and as you can see here, you have 3 copies in our set in the main. Get a Teferi's Puzzle Box for value in there. You're going to find your regular prison type cards, Chalice of the Void, 4 of those, 1 Crucible of Worlds, 1 Engineered Explosives, 4 Ensnaring Bridges. Sideboard does have some newer cards in here. Chandra Awakened Inferno from Core Set 2020, Urza Lord High Artificer from Modern Horizons. On to the Modern Classic, a little smaller, but it is purely modern. First place, Hogak, that also came in 8th place. Second and 5th place, doing better in this tournament, was Jund. 3rd place, Mono Green Tron. 4th place, Mono Red Phoenix. 6th place and 7th place, Eldrazi Tron. Okay, let's look at some of the deck lists that we have not yet looked at. We're going right to 10th place with Pure Steel Paladin. This is a deck a lot of people love. SRAM, Pure Steel Paladin, a lot of cheap artifacts. When it comes to Modern Horizons, just one card, a single copy of Unearth in the main. 14th place, here's an Iza Phoenix deck, so this one can still put up a good result, and here you can see the differences I was alluding to earlier. 4 Arclight Phoenix and then all your cheap spells, but instead of those aggressive creatures, you get 1 Crackling Drake and 4 Thing in the Ice. In the main deck, you also find Lava Dart, Aria of Flame, and Fiery Islet from Modern Horizons. Sideboard sees Pyromancer, Force of Negation, and Magmatic Sinkhole. Here's part 3 of the Star City Games Open as we move on to Legacy. So here's the Legacy decks that those teams were running in that event. First place, Sneak and Show. Actually, no cards from Modern Horizons or Core Set 2020 there, so we won't look at that deck today. It hasn't really changed. Second place, though, is Lands. Third place, Turbo Depths. Fourth place, Rakdos Reanimator. That also came in 6th place. Teamer Delver came in 5th place, and the 7th place 4-color Delver was actually a Teamer Delver deck. It was just kind of mislabeled here. 8th place, 4-color Delver. Okay, let's look at some of these. Second place team was running Lands, and here's a deck that didn't grab a lot of cards from the new sets, and that's pretty much true for most Legacy decks. But the cards they did grab are actually pretty impactful. You're going to find Wrenn and 6 and Field of the Dead here. I mean, perfect cards for this type of build. Force of Vigor is also in the sideboard. Third place team was running Turbo Depths. Not a lot of huge changes to this deck. There are a few newer cards in the sideboard, but as you can see, the main deck is pretty consistent. You're going to find 4 Dark Depths, 4 Thespian Stage, 4 Vampire Hexmage. Here's what's in the sideboard for Modern Horizons and Core Set 2020, Force of Vigor and Veil of Summer. Fourth place team was running Rakdos Reanimator, and yet another misinput here. We're missing some sideboard cards this time, 4 altogether, so they could have been Wear and Tear, Thoughtseize, maybe a combination of the two that's very possible for this build. But let's see what we do know. 1 copy of Ashen Rider in the main, sometimes that's in the sideboard. 4 Chancellor of the Annex, 1 Grave Titan, 4 Grizzlebrand. When it comes to your reanimation cards, you have things like Animate Dead, Reanimate, Exhume. Not a lot happening here when it comes to newer sets. 1 copy of Shenanigans in the sideboard. 5th place team was running Teamer Delver. A lot of these Delver decks are very similar. We're going to look at a few of them today, so I don't want to spend a ton of time on this. This particular version running 2 copies of True Name Nemesis, 4 Tarmogoyf, 2 Dreadhorde Arcanist, 4 Delver of Secrets. Let's see what's coming to us from Modern Horizons or Core Set 2020. In the main, you have Wrenn and 6, of course, a big card pushing this deck. Force of Negation is here, and Fiery Islet. Sideboard also has another copy of Force of Negation and Magmatic Sinkhole. And some sideboards do run Veil of Summer. The 8th place team was running a different Delver deck, 4-color Delver. Not a lot of changes here. One thing you'll notice, though, they are running black. They can throw in some cards in the main like Gurmag Angler and Abrupt Decay. In the main deck, you'll find Wrenn and 6 here like the previous deck. The side has Plague Engineer, and from Core Set 2020, Veil of Summer again. This one wasn't, but some main decks will run Fiery Islet, and some sideboards will run Force of Negation. Golgari Depths. As we move out of the top 8, here's what the 10th place team was running. Very similar to the Turbo Depths deck we looked at a few moments ago, so I don't want to spend a ton of time on it, but it was doing something different from Core Set 2020, so I wanted to point that out. It's running 4 copies of Elvish Reclaimer. You're also going to find Nurturing Peatland here from Modern Horizons. In the side is Plague Engineer. 11th place team was running 4-color Control, kind of the control deck of choice right now when it comes to Legacy. As you can see here, there's some key cards that you would expect in most control decks, like Force of Will. 3 copies of Jace the Mind Sculptor show up here. But there are some huge inclusions here from Modern Horizons. Wrenn and 6 yet again. Plague Engineer right here in the main. Arkham's Astrolabe as well. And in the side, an additional copy of Plague Engineer. Also, some sideboards will run Force of Vigor. Okay, the 15th place team was running Is It Delver. This is the last Delver deck we'll look at, I promise. This one is pretty similar, but it is doing something slightly different. 3 copies of Young Pyromancer. Fiery Islet in the main. Sideboard, Force of Negation, and Magmatic Sinkhole. Storm. This is what the 17th place team went with. And Storm hasn't changed too much. Copy of Tendrils of Agony. This one is running a copy of Empty the Warrens. Lion's Eye Diamonds, Lotus Petals, Ad Nauseam. You kind of know the drill here. The sideboard, though, does bring us a Core Set 2020 card, Veil of Summer. 21st place team went with good old Miracles, and you have 3 copies of Jace the Mind Sculptor, 3 Monastery Mentor, Back to Basics, Counterbalance shows up here, Force of Will, Terminus. Again, you're very familiar with this build if you play any Legacy. Force of Negation and Prismatic Vista, those show up in the main nowadays. In the sideboard, again Veil of Summer from Core Set 2020 and Nature's Chant from Modern Horizons. 22nd place team was running 12 post, and this is a big mana deck if you want to put out some big colorless things. Some of the better things you can do: Walking Ballista, Karn Sign of Urza, Karn the Great Creator, Ugin the Ineffable, Ugin the Spirit Dragon, and then of course you have Cloud Post, Glimmer Post, Vesuva powering them out. You also have 4 Grim Monoliths in this build, a copy of Voltaic Key. Let's look at the newer cards though. 2 copies of Mystic Forger here, which is feeling pretty normal nowadays in these colorless decks, so that's not too surprising. But you do get 2 copies of Manifold Key and only 1 copy of Voltaic Key. I think that's kind of sweet. The first ability here, for all practical purposes, very similar to Voltaic Key, but it has a second ability. Pay 3, tap, target creature can't be blocked this turn. Very sweet in this deck with Walking Ballista. Okay, let's move on to the Star City Games Legacy Classic event. Now, this one, of course, is a little smaller, but it is purely Legacy. First place, Golgari Depths. Second place, Death and Taxes. Now, no new cards in this particular build, so again, we'll skip it this week since it really hasn't changed. Mono Red Prison, though, came in 3rd place. Azorius Stoneblade came in 4th place. Bomberman, 5th place. Hogak, 6th place. 7th place, 4-Colored Delver. 8th place, Dredge. So let's look at some of the decks we haven't seen yet. 3rd place, Mono Red Prison. Now there's one too many cards in the main deck here. I'm assuming maybe one of the 4s should have been a 3 or one of the 3s a 2, but that's what we have to work with, I suppose. But here's the deck for the most part. Not a lot of changes. There is a pretty interesting card hanging out in the sideboard we'll look at in just a second, but a pretty classic prison deck here. 3 Magus of the Moon, 4 Chandra Torch of Defiance, 2 Karn Sign of Urza, 4 Karn the Great Creator, Chalice of the Void is here, and Snaring Bridge is here, Blood Moon, so on and so forth. But 1 copy in the sideboard of Chandra Awakened Inferno from Core Set 2020. 4th place is Azorius Stoneblade, and again, a deck that hasn't changed a whole lot. 4 Stoneforge Mystic, some equipment, a lot of control elements here. In the main here, you find Force of Negation and Prismatic Vista. Bomberman came in 5th place. This is a sweet deck too. Another deck that was really pushed by Karn the Great Creator, 4 copies of that in the main. This has been a very popular Legacy deck recently. And again, another colorless deck that's using this. 3 copies of Mystic Forge here in the main. Nature's Chant is also in the sideboard. Hogak, 6th place. Very similar in a lot of ways. It doesn't run Vegevine, but very similar to the pre-Bridge from Below banning Modern deck. Good enough for Legacy, I guess. I mean, Legacy does give you some other stuff like Entomb and Cabal Therapy, of course, but look at the core cards here. Faithless Looting, Bridge from Below, Altar of Dementia, Hogak, of course, Stitcher Supplier, Gravecrawler, Carrion Feeder, Bloodghast seem familiar? The card Modern Horizons introduced here into Legacy, of course, Hogak Arisen Necropolis. Rotting Regisaur from Core Set 2020 in the sideboard, as well as a copy of Shenanigans. 8th place was Dredge, and yes, even the Legacy Dredge builds are running a copy of Hogak, as you can see here. So, again, it is classic Dredge, Faithless Looting, Creeping Chill, Bridge from Below, 4 copies of all those. You have your pretty typical creature suite here, and like I said, your 1 copy of Hogak Arisen Necropolis. 13th place was Azorius Helm, very similar to Azorius Control, actually, but it is a little different. 2 copies of Helm of Obedience in the main here. Force of Negation and Prismatic Vista also show up in the main. Sideboard has Veil of Summer from Core Set 2020 and Nature's Chant from Modern Horizons. 14th place, Hogak Depths, and yet again we have 1 too many cards in the main, so I'm assuming maybe one of these 4s should have been a 3 or a 3 a 2 perhaps. Now this is a cross between a Depths deck, it's got Dark Depths, it has Thespian Stage, it's got Vampire Hexmage, and a Hogak deck. You see 3 copies of Hogak, Satyr Wayfinder, Stitcher Supplier, Life from the Loam, a copy even creeps in here. Very interesting build. Core Set 2020 brings the Elvish Reclaimer, and like I mentioned, Modern Horizons brings Hogak Arisen Necropolis. Force of Vigor is in the sideboard too. 16th place, Mono Green Post, and this is similar in some ways to the Post deck we saw earlier. Of course, it's got Cloud Post, it's got Glimmer Post, it's going to have Vesuvas in it, as you would expect. But this is doing a little bit with the green here. Sylvan Library, Crop Rotation, Ancient Stirrings. Here's what I thought was cool though. In the main, 3 copies of Golos Tireless Pilgrim from Core Set 2020. Veil of Summer, also from Core Set 2020, shows up in the sideboard. Okay, well that is it. So this is going to be the last week that we look back at Modern Horizons cards. I think they've been out for long enough now. I'll continue to focus on Core Set 2020 until we get to the Throne of Eldraine preview season. But until next time, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible through the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page, as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.